Now it's time to fill the tank with baffles. The baffles will help control the sloshing of the water and actually solidify the tank. So here's how we're going to install the baffles. These are just set in, they're not welded yet. So we have our main principal baffle in the center. Then we have two down near the bottom. We have one much taller one in the center. And as you can see, it's staged so the water can't go across it for the other two. And then we have two near the top that are staged as well. Now we just have to measure center. I'm OCD, so I like them all placed evenly. And once I've got that done, we'll weld them in. This morning we're out by the pool. The reason we're out by the pool is we need to test our tank. In order to do so, we have to empty the pool at this time of year. So conserve a bit of water and fill that 120 gallons into the tank. The water testing is done. We know it holds water, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. The next step is putting the lid on it. In order to secure the lid and to make sure that it stays nice and flat, we're first going to weld in these little tabs with a little space on them. That way it allows us to register the top against that. We'll be welding one about every foot, giving us a nice place to register the top against and make sure that it stays nice and flat. Now we have our supports welded in, and the technique you saw me using is called pendulum welding. And pendulum welding yields the same finish as we saw before, but without the need for a tool. More chance of burning your hands, but allows you to get into places that are otherwise inaccessible with the speed welding tip. So as you can see, this is the result of a pendulum weld. It's solid, doesn't look that bad, and it allows you to do curves like this. And this is inside the tank. Nobody's ever gonna see it other than the few hundred people watching this. So not a big deal that my lines aren't perfectly straight. The whole idea of this was to show you what pendulum welding is and how actually easy it is to do. So you don't need to have that special welding tip. If your gun doesn't come with it, you can get away with the pendulum welding quite nicely. So a tip like this that you've seen me use throughout the majority of the project would be very difficult to work in here. So you'll notice the angle, and the gun can't go through here. So yes, had I had forethought and put these in before these, of course it wouldn't have been an issue. But I like putting them in at the end just to make sure, and the pendulum welding does the job quite nicely.
Before we seal the tank up completely, we need to add one thing. And this is a fitting to allow, this is actually going to be the vent to allow air into the tank. And the reason I'm putting it on the side near the top is simple. There's going to be a clear tube going from this one down to the one at the other end. That way we'll be able to know the level just by looking at the clear tube. So we'll be putting this glue on before. This is a primer. And this helps keep it in place as I'm welding, because the hole isn't an exact fit. So this is going to keep it in place. I have to let this dry 60 seconds. Now that our 60 seconds is up, we can add the glue. And we'll put it on sparingly, so we'll spread it around. Once the glue is on, we'll put it down and I'll give it a little twist just to spread the glue a little more. We're almost ready to weld. We have to put something in the hole. If we don't have anything in the hole, unfortunately, we can deform this. We're going to put a valve in. It's 1/2 inch NPT, or National Pipe Thread. And it's a rather soft plastic part, so threading things into it isn't always a joy. There we go. So this is LDPE, or low density polyethylene. Has a slightly lower melting point. So when we put the gun to it, we will be more careful of what we're doing. Ready to weld. The last step of the process, putting the lid on the box. We have everything in place. We have all our dividers, our baffles. They're all ready to go. And the lid is simple. We welded these tabs on to hold the lid in place. You just have to line it up, put it on, snap it down into place. Now we get to weld it up.
When doing some water testing, we noticed there was a bit of a leak here. And in order to fix the leak, you take a Dremel tool with this type of tip on it and go along the seam that was leaking. And we can clearly see that it wasn't bonded. So up here, let me try to focus here. There we go. So up here, it's nicely bonded. And down here, I'm sorry, I have to keep my thumb in there to keep the focus. There, we see it, we see the split. So ground it out with the Dremel tool and we'll re-weld it.
Here are a few additional little welding tips. So first of all, when we want to do a butt weld like this, so two pieces together, I've chamfered the edges, and I'm going to use the pendulum method. You saw the speed welding method a lot in this video, and it works great. The pendulum welding method works equally as well, and sometimes is actually better. So to start a pendulum weld, and the term pendulum comes from moving this up and down. We want to soften the base material as well as the rod. And you can see the rod is going into there quite nicely. And you'll notice the angle or the bend on the rod. And if I try to pull back, it's stuck down. Now if we try to go too fast, or aim too much at the rod, you'll see it's not stuck. So that means we have a poor weld. So we have to do the base material a little more. And now when we test it, it's stuck. So the other thing that you should not do when welding is actually after you're welding is rush the finishing. So once you've got the weld done, let it cool back down slowly. Don't try to force it with air. Or water or anything like that. You don't want to shock it to cool it. And test your weld every little once in a while just to make sure that you're going at the right speed for the material. And here it's a little loose, so I'll heat up a little more, put it back down, and you'll see. And when you get to the end, keep going past it. Now while it's hot, you can see that it's clear. As it cools down, it goes back to white. And now we have a fairly flush weld. The beginning was a little loose, but we'll let this cool down. We'll show you another weld. Now we're doing a pendulum weld into a V-groove. We've got the back of it supported with this piece so it doesn't move away, and we're holding it down with a clamp. Again, like the other pendulum weld, we're going to start by softening the rod and the base material. Slowly going along. Now I'm keeping the pendulum between the two sheets. I'm not like this, I'm not like this. I'm trying to keep it a relatively equal angle between the two. This is a 90-degree corner, so that angle should be 45 degrees. Once again, test your weld every little once in a while. Now the speed welder does have one great advantage. You're not aiming hot air at yourself. Now a few other things. If we don't heat the rod enough, you'll notice the curve that it's starting to get. And it's going into the base. If we heat the rod too much, so it almost goes in at a 90-degree angle. And sometimes can lead to a weld that isn't what we want. We'll just go back here. And I'm exerting a fair bit of pressure on the rod. Maybe 5 pounds. That's why it's going into the base material as much as it is. So there we have an inside weld. Now I started this at 90 degrees, and one thing that's very interesting to note is because of the heat generated, the plastic moves a fair bit. So you probably saw it in the video, or if you go back and speed it up, this piece moving up like that. So these started at a 90-degree angle, and now as it's cooling, it's actually bringing that in. And this is quite warm. Hence, proper jigging, clamping to keep your pieces together is very important to get a proper weld and to prevent this movement. Now, we're gonna let this cool, and when we do let it cool, we should have a solid weld here, and it will straighten back up a little bit. And we can throw a bit of heat here to level it off if we wanted to. But as I said before, proper jigging is actually a better way of doing it. Now, if we put that there, we can fill in this weld here. And by filling that in, it will actually bring this back a little bit. So since we started at that end, I'm gonna just fill in this little end here. And you'll see what it does to that weld. Here we're almost back to 90 degrees, having re-welded that. But at this end, we still have that really sharp angle. So let this piece cool down. This is the piece that we butt welded before, and we get a nice strong weld, but we have a piece that's warped. Again, clamping is very important when welding plastic. So one way to fix that is to weld it again. But this time, we'll weld the other side while clamping it down. Actually quite stuck well, but let me move the camera, give you a different view of the weld. So there we have a different view of the weld. So now you see the piece is laid pretty much down flat. We'll let that weld cool. And you notice this side I did not put a chamfer. The reason? To show you what advantage the chamfer has. So this is quite proud of the surface. If we go to the other side where we put the chamfer, you see the weld is very flush. So the chamfer has many advantages. One of them is having a flush weld, but second is strength. Gives you more surface area to weld to. So we'll let this cool. So even in the middle of a flat surface like this, we can actually bury the rod into this quite easily. So we'll start a little puddle here. Once the temperature gets right, the rod just sinks right in. Now we are adding additional material, so obviously there's going to be a bit of a welt there. So it's not flush, but we have sunk that in fairly deep. And you can see the heat mark around it. Now we want to let this cool at all times before manipulating, before moving things, before working with it. When making RV tanks, one of the most difficult welds to accomplish is the inside corner like this. And it's also your most likely area of leaks. We have chamfered this area here and this area there. We're going to start with the rod. And really get this corner nice and hot. Same with the rod. And really force it in. And we're going to let it sit for a second to let that cool, just to make sure it's grabbed properly. And then we're going to continue the weld along the rest of the tank. Then from there, you have to do the other side. So again, we're going to get it nice and hot. Both the rod, and you'll notice the rod, as I'm heating it, changes color. It actually goes clear. So we get the corner nice and warm, and again, just force that into the corner. And slowly move up. Now once that cools, we'll have a nice sealed corner. This is one area where the pendulum weld is actually superior to the speed welding tip, because the speed welding tip won't allow you to get into that corner. Thanks for watching this two-part series on making RV tanks and welding HDPE plastic. Now, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, please leave them below. I'll be happy to answer. And if you like this type of video, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll be making a lot more of them.